there are times when, I have to be, or a strength coach has to be the stressor, the basketball sort of stressor guy.
Yes.
And then what are the things, because going to the previous question about like quantifying these things and learning about the game, it's like the more we now know, it's like, all right, well, now we go to our mimic the basketball programming. How many hops and jumps and sprints can we get in right now that, again, will kind of set you up? So the objectification, again, of more of this stuff lends us to give that person, I think, a more purposeful training session.
Hello, and welcome to the Physical Preparation Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Robertson, and I'll be joined on the line later today by Chris Chase of the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, normally I would go into our usual week that was, what's new in my neck of the woods, but let's be honest, I got a lot going on right now between trying to prep this facility, trying to just do all of the things that are required to make that happen. So I'm going to forego that today. Plus, as you know, Chris and I have a tendency to trend a little bit long with our interviews. So I want to make sure I get right into it. So a little bit about Chris. He is the director of performance for the Memphis Grizzlies of the NBA. In this role, he's in charge of managing the Grizzlies' performance staff and weight room, writing their performance programming, and serving as one of the strength and conditioning coaches. Now, in this show, Chris and I talk a lot about trying to determine and meet the demands of professional basketball by any means necessary. So whether that's using free weights, isolated machines, flywheels, or anything in between, our goal is always to minimize injury risk and keep our athletes on the court. So as always, Chris and I had an awesome chat. I really think you're going to love it, but enough for me. Let's do this. One thing Bill Hartman and I have talked about for years now is the power of mentorship. Early on, I didn't have a mentor to shape or guide me, or most importantly, help me find the blind spots in my own training and coaching. But luckily, after many years of trial and error, I found Bill, and my professional success exploded as a result. But the downside to the mentorship process, at least professionally, is that it can be pricey. For private mentees that I work with, it costs anywhere from $3.99 to $5.99 per month to work together. And while I know the results go far beyond that price, the fact of the matter is that just won't work for a lot of folks. So when Bill and I sat down a while back, we asked ourselves a really tough question. How can we help shape the future of the industry and truly make it great? And beyond that, how can we create amazing content yet make it affordable to virtually every trainer or coach out there? And the answer for us was simple: restart iFast University. Here's what you'll get when you become a member of iFast University. One update each month from myself and Bill. This could cover anything from improving exercise technique to writing better programs and everything in between. Twice per month Q&As, where Bill and I will personally answer your questions to help you become better at training, coaching, or even running your fitness business. A Facebook group where you'll be surrounded by like-minded trainers and coaches who are serious about getting better, and access to the iFastU archives, where you'll be able to watch literally hundreds of pieces of content from the iFast team over the years. This blend of content and Q&A is specifically designed to help make you the best trainer or coach possible. If you're interested in learning more, head on over to ifastuniversity.com to get signed on. We'd love to have you on board. Chris, my guy, so excited to have you back on the show. Let's start with basics first. Who the heck are you, and what do you do for a living?
What's going on, Mike? Appreciate you having me back, man. I am currently the director of performance for the Memphis Grizzlies, rolling into year 5 now. Just finished up year 4, so time is certainly flying, and it gets better and better each year.
I love it, man. I love it. Second, what's new in your neck of the woods since the last time we chatted?
I think, this, like everybody else, it's been an interesting past couple, maybe 2 years, close to 2 years, whatever that timeline is. It's pretty foggy, I feel like.
Yeah.
But, since having the NBA season stopped, mid-season, right after All-Star break, I remember we were in Portland getting the call to say, hey, we're about to fly home. This game is being canceled tomorrow. And we start this whole process of going into, hey, what do we do here? How do we change our training? Guys are going to be gone. Even when guys come back, how do we train those guys? I think about what we were thinking about at that time, and that was getting equipment to guys who were we didn't know when we were going to see them back. Trying to figure out where they were going to be, and like everybody else, I think, because it was so hard to get equipment early on, it still is, right? We were shooting guys equipment and getting programming out and trying to do this remote thing and setting up those pieces. I mean, that seems like, literally years ago now. And then starting to get guys back in the gym. What does that look like? Individual training, all these sorts of things, and protocols that we all have had to go through and adjust for. And then diving into the bubble and going through that process, and that being very, very interesting experience. And then it seems like those seasons have blended into one. LA with the championship. Seems like we have a quick off season. We're into this next abbreviated season, roll through that and have, thankfully for us, have a bit of success and still move in a positive direction. And now, we just said this offline, but now here we are where it's, it feels like we can exhale and kind of have something more official. So I guess the new thing is kind of everybody's new thing of going through COVID and adjusting life and being very thankful that we can roll through with minimal stoppages in our jobs and continuing to be able to advance versus, I feel for so many others who weren't able to do that. So pumped up to kind of get back to, I don't even want to say that because we're still in the midst of it, but to go through, seemingly we're about to go through kind of the first normal-ish season as far as scheduling goes that it's been in a couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, it was just crazy. Obviously I'm on the outside looking in. I have my guys that come in, and some of them I had a pretty extended amount of time with during quarantine because they got nowhere else to go. So they can come in and see me and it's one-on-one. But man, the turnaround for you guys and thinking about how quickly you went from the end of, was that the 2019-2020 season? I don't know. My years are all messed up. But the turnaround, like 2 months, right? And then literally you're like flipping it and you're right back into this season. And I felt like that one was at a breakneck pace too, right? It's like everything's crammed in.
There's so many elements that it was, they'll write a book on this one day, I guess. Yeah. But just the weird elements of like training, for instance, when guys came back, as an example, like you can only be in the half court, for instance, with only one-on-one with your sport coach in the half court. Now, for us, that necessitated like, well, now we have to rap about, what does that mean for training for guys when they can't be in the full court, they can't get up and down, different elements that were a part of each of these levels of restrictions were interesting challenges, and I think there was good evolution through that to now tweeze some of those things out from the style of training that we had to go through sometimes during quarantine that were good learning experiences, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Okay, so lots of stuff I want to cover with you here today, and you were incredibly gracious when I asked you, like, what do you want to talk about? You basically wrote the entire interview for me. But the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of establishing standards. And I hadn't thought of it in this way, but I love the way you put it. So let's start there. Why is establishing standards important? And maybe how do we go about putting this into practice?
Nothing new, right, for anybody really in the strength and conditioning field where, I think for us over time, what muddies the waters is, so many of the different elements that we use or pieces of equipment that we use. So, establishing standards related to, hinging or deadlifting and squatting, those are classic things that have been established over time. If you, deadlift 2 times your body weight, or if we want to say, 1.5 or 1.75 times your body weight in some sort of squatting exercise, that's easy to understand for strength and conditioning coaches, something that we should all kind of strive for if we're using these big integrative exercises. For us, I think as time has gone along and we have this, training menu that is open to include a lot of different things, open to adding supports, open to using machines, open to aiding in whatever way we need to aid players in, make these exercises trainable. Now it's like, well, what is your strength standard for a hack squat at, a 30-degree angle? So that is just different and takes maybe some time to figure out. And now that we've had maybe some years with certain machines, and this is very, very imperfect and still evolving as we get more data. Again, just like everything else, as we get more data, as we understand what is strong, or some of these relative strength measures related to things like a hack squat or a hamstring curl or a shuttle MVP squat, then we'll come up, I think, with better numbers. But it was important to really nail this down over the past couple of years to understand, when is it time to graduate to something else? When is it appropriate to graduate to something else? Assuming trainability is going to be achieved in this thing or the thing that you're choosing, then, what do we have to strive for? And now, and the hack squat is a good example. It's, what is a hack squat, strength standard at a low angle, and then a hack squat standard at a high angle. We achieve that, then what's the next thing? Well, make your choice into, a handle supported belt squat or handle supported safety bar squat or something of the like. And hopefully standards can be, then we're chasing those standards in sort of the next level of exercise. So to come back to the question, it's important now for us, because I think we'll get into this a little bit more, but with establishing KPIs, with establishing these objectives and key results that sort of now provide more of a framework for us when we're goal setting with players and we're understanding or objectifying where these guys need to be. These standards now are plug and play into that. So if we have, for an example, an objective of, increasing lower body strength, well, what are some of these key results that we would want to chase after that would reflect then this objective of increasing lower body strength? Well, standards provide a nice, easy way to say, okay, we're progressing here because we believe that this version of a bilateral squat will increase lower body strength. And we believe that if we get to, 2 times body weight in this thing, that then we can progress to a thing we could load even more, or we could challenge you even more with. And that even furthers this objective of increasing lower body strength. So it kind of, again, feeding sort of, the standards are nothing new, of course. I think what's different is, really establishing more standards and more clarity in everything on the menu. And then allowing those things to, or understanding how we sort of blend those into our goal setting, make the players aware of them, make it competitive. Chasing a 2 times body weight deadlift is something that we can now bucket into that competitive thing, right, and put on screens and chase after some of that stuff. So it feeds into a lot of stuff. And that's maybe just, how we're integrating those standards into our framework.
That's awesome, man. Okay. So I want to circle back to something you mentioned, because I think a lot of people, maybe listeners, maybe not, but a lot of people, when they hear the word machines, are immediately like, they use machines, like if it's not barbell or a dumbbell or a kettlebell, they may be shocked. Versus you do this long enough. I remember Buddy Morris giving the example at one point of, hey, look, if I've got a 15-year veteran NFL lineman, that dude's knees are probably shot. The last thing I'm going to do is have him squat with a barbell. I'm going to put him on a leg press, get an output, and I'm going to move on. So would you talk to me a little bit about why machines have a place in your programming and maybe the role that they might serve?
Yeah. It's funny. There's so many folks, which is great, that are talking about this more and more. And, shout out to so many people that I get to interact with every day. But in particular, our head strength coach, Eric Schmidt, he just did I think it's called a seminar of strength that they do at Tim Karen's gym. So shout out to Allegiant. It was revolving around the importance of machines and isolated exercises. And that's one example, I think, of many where guys are putting out there this information because of how the pendulum has swung in too far in different directions. Sure. Where it's like, oh, we kind of, let's be some leaders in this industry in terms of pulling it back a little bit. And isolation or exercises, machine exercises or working muscles in relative isolation is kind of, there's still a stigma behind it. So I'm definitely happy to hop on that soapbox and talk about the importance, because we see it in our space every day. The reason why there are, we have acquired so many machines and changed sort of the way the weight room looks. And, we used to have turf in the weight room, where, 5-6 years ago, that would have been something I would be like, hey, just give me all the turf,
right.
Hey, movement, this, that, functionality, blah, blah, blah. where of course still place for that, but our space didn't allow for it. It didn't allow for now fitting these important pieces of equipment. And it was one thing or the other. And importance is or we place such high importance on these, stressing these muscles in isolation, or know the importance of that, that's something we got rid of to make space for those pieces. So what does that tell you about, we think of those things and what is functional? Now, this is sort of garbage-esque term a little bit in terms of, we can't really throw that out anymore and nobody check somebody and say like, okay, man, what do you really mean by that? Yeah. And I think conditioning muscle, stressing a muscle in isolation, that muscle doesn't know a lot of times, what is this stressor coming in that I just have to react to? What is the adaptation that you want to get? And sometimes you want to get that muscle bigger or stronger or more conditioned. And you can do that, or you're confident that you're doing that to the maximum if you're on these machines that really help you isolate that muscle. I think in previous years, as I've gone through this and continue to think about, this concept of trainability and minimizing the bad, always being cognizant that this is a stressor and that there always will be bad, but maximizing the good, a lot of the good revolves around, am I stressing the tissue that I want to stress? And there is a additive to that, is like in the way that I want to stress it. And then you could say, okay, well, in the way I want to stress it, you could choose to say squatting, deadlifting, etc. But I would contest that I could stress the muscles that you want to target a lot more if I just gave you some help, i.e. some sort of machine that straps you in to some sort of position that kind of allows you to target one thing over the other. Yep. Squatting is a great example. Like if you are saying, I'm going to attack this with squatting, no doubt there are muscles of your legs that are going to have to work, and probably quadriceps are one of them, but do you know how much they are being stressed? Do you know how much that 7-footer has to compensate, usually away from being a knee dominant squat and into something that's more hip and back dominant mostly? Yep. And so are you functional in that sense, where you're not really targeting the tissue that you probably need to rehab if that athlete had some sort of knee injury? I mean, you can argue, yes, you are getting that muscle group or a particular muscle is getting stressed. But if I put you on a hack squat, or if I put you on a seated knee extension or something of the like, if we're talking about anterior chain or quadriceps musculature, then I think I'm going to be able to targetly stress that more than you would on a squat. Yep. Now, is there one and the other, or one or the other? Of course not. But I think we, in many of, much of the research and much of what has been recommended over the years in this space, and we deal with a lot of guys who are coming back from injuries and a lot of knee injuries, most people are going to recommend to me, a physical therapist or medical space, guys in the medical space, which I'm going to defer to here, they are going to tell you that you have to return these muscles to their requisite strength before you move on to something that is integrative in nature. Not necessarily nothing can happen that's integrative before, isolation levels of strength are returned to normal. That's not what I'm saying. But I think there's a lot to do when it comes to conditioning the muscle, getting it bigger, getting it stronger, moving at a high rate or velocity, high rates of force. I mean, think of sitting on a, seated knee extension and moving at high rates with high forces, not something we really think about. But if we're thinking of advancement, we're thinking of, this, how we would normally progress, doesn't it make logical sense to progress from isolation, cover all your performance bases in that, if you're able to? So, focusing the bigger piece of the pie, if you will, on that, all the while, are you patterning and doing things slower and using isometric holds and getting these neurological, challenges as well at a slower rate and under less maybe load. And by the time you get the muscle returned to its requisite function and strength in isolation, boom, you've been hitting split squats the whole time, iso, slow tempo, you've been hitting supported squatting, you've been hitting one leg RDLs, holds, you've been hitting, this hinge patterning work. Now all of a sudden, hey, isolation, whatever tests you have in isolation, you're good to go. Let's move on to this integrative work and let that be the way bigger piece of the pie.
I love it. Man, that's a good answer. Okay.
Appreciate
So
that.
let's circle back to this idea of establishing standards. When we're talking about this, when we're developing this, like, how do we expand these standards to as many elements of our training as possible so we can establish objectives and get key results?
I think it's tough. It's easiest with a classic resisted exercises for sure. I think, again, I go back to just easy standards that have been established over time. When it comes to, this is where we struggle, and this is more parts of the podcast where you just talk about like, this is where I think we should go with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And how do you establish standards for, things in the power or plyometric space? How do you establish standards in the conditioning space relative to, the NBA? And that's still a bit muddy and a bit gray, but I think the pieces that are really important and that, guys in basketball players or guys in the NBA, have really struggle with, I think those are the standards that are easiest to establish. There are things, and if there's information that I think we get from, our force plate testing, for instance, if we're getting vertical ground reaction forces in multiple, a variety of things that look like jumping and hopping, that is, enough information for us to establish some sort of standards. Something I think relative to body weight, there's so many things that we could sort of normalize this data and look to say, hey man, your profile, you're a guy that looks like this and is made up like this. These are the things that you should see, or performance measures that we should be touching. And that's, again, nothing new. We've been talking about probably T3 as a performance facility for years now, where that is an asset of, why guys go to that facility, because there's a lot of data and ability to compare. So brings in that ammo, these standards that not only standards that we want you to achieve, but these key performance indicators that say, like, we've seen a lot of guys that come through here. This is a key performance indicator of somebody who is going to be injury resilient, or somebody who is, going to perform well. And if we're falling behind that, to come back to your question with the standards and establishing these, and chasing after these key results and establishing, goals and objectives, again, it's, if we think of an objective, this is strength coaching talk, and these kind of your objectives would be is increasing power or something like that. Or you could say, increasing, unilateral power. And then we're looking at somebody's counter movement hop, and what would we be chasing? I think we would need a guide, when it comes to that sort of information that we're getting back from the force plate. If we really believe that performance should increase, to what level should it increase by, and to what number relative to how much you weigh and the position that you play? This is all things that we realize that we should be looking at, but it's sometimes hard if we don't have all that information, but the thing is, we do now. And so
right.
I think now this work is really, how do we visualize? How do we connect the dots? And I've used this analogy before, but I'm dating myself now, but the movie Minority, Tom Cruise is looking at a screen and I can pull from this, I can pull from this file. Oh, this video shows this, the force plate data shows this, muscle isolation testing has shown this. What standards have we reached in this and this? Oh, it looks like we haven't reached certain standards when it comes to, ankle dorsiflexion on the right side. Counter movement depth is something that's been inconsistent or something that is asymmetrical, on right versus left. Well, let me connect that dot of ankle immobility to the fact that they're not willing to bend on the right side. That could be the reason. Oh, is there another reason? Well, their quadricep strength looks in isolation when we isokinetically test them, their quadricep strength is great on the right side. So then we say, well, that's off the table. Ankle must be the thing. Hey, we got to narrow in on ankle. Here comes your objective. What are your key results? Dorsiflexion greater than 32, 35, whatever you're chasing after. And then that says, okay, this is our big thing. Let's just chase after this. I don't necessarily have to, in my training for this phase, chase after quadricep strength, for instance. I can move to the other, hip. We saw in isolation that your hip strength is weak, or muscles of your hip, glute med, we're chasing after hamstring strength. I can focus on quad strength, EO's got the ankle mobility, and now we're sort of these standards are now feeding into actionable steps as you know, as far as how we're going to program for this person.
Well, I think the great thing here is you're trying to objectify everything versus, oh, well, I think his quads are weak or whatever, right? Like you're trying to actively find ways to measure, test, and objectify the things that are relevant or important to you, and then use that to drive your programming versus, you know, and look, this is how we had to do it 20 years ago, right? Because we didn't have these tools. We maybe didn't have the knowledge base, but it's like, well, I think this, or my intuition leads me to believe this. Versus now, you guys have really narrowed things down to like, no, this is not a thing. I'm not worried about this, but this is a thing, and this is what we're going to attack. And it's got to make your programming so much easier.
Yeah, and maybe more time efficient. You know, maybe there's so many reasons. You probably have these things that you're like, all right, I know we're time limited, so we know we have to be more efficient. And in the past, we've come up with solutions that maybe thought they were great and they weren't great. In this field. We know that time limit thing is still there. And then you finally stumble upon like, oh, this is really how we could be more efficient. Like we really know this information and can kind of take it off. Like I said before, it's like this gives us direction on how to program. More importantly, it gives us direction on how we shouldn't be programming in for this player. And why? Because we don't have that much time with them. So that's okay. And that's our job. This is, you know, you kind of maybe realize more and more what the job is every year. And the job is, you know, realize the environment is not going to change. And then if you know that is a constant variable, then you have to be the variable that changes to cater to that. And it just takes time to keep acquiring certain pieces of equipment that allow for objective measure, learning, understanding. Okay, now it's like this piece of equipment lets us know this. We have a standard that then we can establish for that. Then it's like, guys, who has reached the standard? Couple of dudes. All right, well, what else do they have that is great, you know, in addition to this standard? Let's see how these dots start to connect. Or what have we chased after with this guy that we now know is strong in this? And we thought it was because of this, but actually, no, it was because of something else, you know? So, because like you said, it's like, oh, you're trying to objectify everything. And that's true. And I hope now it's more actionable than it has been in previous years. And it's like, man, don't get me wrong, like more so than ever, I think, you know, I have this caveat every time we talk of like, we'll talk about this, but we realize so much more about the forces that we need to stress these guys with, because objectifying everything, we understand the forces of the game more and more. And it's like, we realize that, you know, the little one leg RDLs with 30-pound dumbbells like are not going to, you know, they're not going to cut it. They're not making any sort of difference comparatively to what they are being stressed with in game. So like the, you know, strength coaching pieces, man. Yeah. Like lifting is a big part of it. Like we're basing things off of, not basing everything, but we're relying on a lot of different output-based measures in our performance space. Don't get me wrong, we have a medical space too, that they have their own things that they look at, so then we can combine together.
Right.
We're in performance, and our job is, you know, what's in our bucket right now, our responsibility bucket is, you know, are some of these output-based measures that then, you know, have these standards associated with them. And then, you know, it's like this, okay, now we can sort of, you know, have this high intensity sort of resistance training. I don't want to say high intensity, but we still are lifting weights and chasing some of these outputs that we believe will definitely help them on the court. But yes, are we trying to kind of associate numbers and objectivity to a lot of this stuff? For sure. But I don't think it takes away from any of the classic training pieces that we're trying to do.
No. Hope I didn't infer that. It's more about you're finding ways to make it more actionable.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. I love it. Well, let's go with that point you were talking about before about like quantifying information, because one thing I know you guys are always doing down in Memphis is trying to quantify and better understand the demands of the game, right? Because all sports are unique. Basketball has its own unique demands to it as far as starts, stops, decelerations, energy system demands. So with that being said, what are you guys doing these days to help monitor that? And maybe along those same lines, how is your research into the game and the demands of the game driving what you're doing in an athlete's weight room or movement training?
I think that there's a lot to that, right? We start dipping our toe into the LPS monitoring stuff where we're monitoring loads on the court and understanding the game more, like I mentioned before. And probably what this gets me to now from an answer is what I said before about the forces that these guys are subjected to, and under duress and in this chaotic environment and under fatigue, a certain level of fatigue, what forces do they have to, muster up to buffer a certain move or joint angle or, thing that they have to do. And I remember doing a presentation this was the NBSCA conference or whatever, I think a few years ago, where that presentation was we talked about conditioning and we talked about cardiac and the respiratory system, not being huge limiters for basketball players postulating because they've played all their lives. They're conditioned for this sport, where other sports sometimes these dudes don't play all year round, but basketball, that's what you do to get better at that sport, is just play the game. So you're kind of conditioned towards that. Of course, there's a ton of respiratory issues for anybody that could be attacked in training. But these guys, I think it comes down to this muscle level. And at that time, I think we talked more about conditioning and allowing for, things like biking and talking more of the Joel Jamieson stuff. And now we think of that stuff, or I think of that stuff more related to, the machine work, not just the machine work, but thinking of, when you get into a position on court, do these muscles that are being stressed, albeit in an integrated fashion and super dynamic and under, so many different forces and different planes, which we will get to addressing, but your foundation, has that muscle been conditioned and been applied high levels of stress to, and then at high rates as a foundation? And sometimes I think, that's where we've missed in the past, where, this person is not breathing hard or they can't, it's oh my, I'm not conditioned in the sport. You don't really get that anymore. We don't have these big men that are out of shape anymore. Rarely do we, because they wouldn't make it to the NBA in this game. It's just Kevin Durant's in shape,
Yes.
But are Kevin Durant's muscles in shape? I don't know. That's those guys that are subjected to these forces, what is giving out? It's, yes, of course they are under fatigue, but on the muscle level, is that where they're failing? Are we not getting the right fuel there? Are we not targeting the right amount of forces there first, at least, before we get into integrative work? So to go back, swing it way back to the question about, like you said, about, learning more about the guys on court and what are we monitoring? It's that I see it as providing so much great information that now has fingerprinted the game in a lot of ways, albeit gray again and imperfect, but there's more and more information that comes out of just the times, how many times body weight are these different things that happen in the game, these forces of doing a Euro, forces when you land on one foot, forces when you're doing a defensive slide. And what does that necessitate? I mean, we're strength coaches. If you're being subjected to these forces that are above and beyond your body weight by magnitudes of, 6, 7, 8 times, depending on what's happening, then that is fighting for training. And we're just fighting for great training that, because these guys have a small window of adaptability, it needs to be objectified in a pretty good way to then see if we're actually making improvements. But those improvements have to be to buffer the forces that are being subjected to on the court. And I think the information we get to, sort of catering to that piece about on-court stuff is, these high intensity accelerations, like you mentioned, high intensity decelerations, how many high level sprints or faster sprints have they gone through in the game? That information, it's the age old, we get this load number, the components of that load number. It's a bigger picture of what they need to be ready for, and then look at our weight room programming and see if that's reflective of that. Have you been subjected to the volume and intensity, for instance, of these deeper counter movement jumps or hops in a repeated way, stationary, in transit, under an additional load, again at a high enough volume? Are things that are, I know this is not apples to apples, but looking at a game and understanding the average amount of jumps or hops or things that look like that at enough intensity that this player does from game to game, well, look at your strength and conditioning programming. If basketball is not something that's in play for that player in the off season, and they usually have 30 to 40 high intensity jumps within a 35-minute game, or when they play 35 minutes, start to put that together. Is that reflected anywhere in your programming at the forces that are kind of close, or at least building kind of close to that? And I think a lot of times, man, the volumes and intensities and that sort of stuff don't match up. And that goes the same probably for lifting as well, or resistance training.
Dude, that's really interesting. And this is something that I constantly vacillate back and forth on. There's these times where I'm like as a strength coach, especially an off-season strength coach, like I need to do a little bit more, right? I got to add a little bit more into the program. I got to make sure they're prepared. But then there's also those days where I'm like, man, they're getting skill work in 5 days a week, or they're playing ones and they're playing twos. So like always kind of back and forth between how much do I push today? Maybe do I back off a little bit? And I'm sure that's what you guys are doing as well, right? Not just in the off season, but even more so in the in season. But I think that's one of the hardest parts, right? And I think you guys are better about it because you have more of the tools and you can probably be more objective with that. But I think that's one of the things personally I struggle with, is trying to find this balance between, I want to make sure I do enough so that they are prepared, but at the same time not do too much, because I realize, like, as a strength coach, you're not the show, right? Them getting court and getting the work in, that is the show. So I think that's one of the hardest parts, is trying to find that balance between giving them enough so that they are prepared, but at the same time not doing too much to where you detract from what's most important to them.
Yeah. I think we'll talk a little bit. It feeds into the pieces of this conversation regarding, like, how do we sort of consolidate these stressors? Mm-hmm. But one point, because you make a great point, is in the off season, especially, this is the time where we really can make the most advances. And of course, we need to coordinate with basketball coaches or any other work that they're doing. And sometimes that is a struggle. Thankfully, when guys are in house, they are being monitored. So then we can really plan and say, well, we were going to do this aerobic plyo routine. We're not going to do that today because of what they're going to be doing on the court. But there's times where I know that you're up on the court and you're spot shooting, and that's pretty much what you're going to be doing. If you spend 30 to 45 minutes doing that, and you're doing, really skill-oriented work in the early off season, then I know you're not getting the necessary stress, maybe tendon stress if we're doing something that's more reactive in nature in terms of like jumps, hops, bounds, or some of the muscular stress that we would get from, some of this more counter movement work that we would be doing. That's if you are not, you bring up a great point of just, at the end of the day, we need to be coordinating with the basketball to realize how much of that work we should be doing, because sometimes trainers are not doing any of it. And sometimes trainers are totally disregarding the fact that they're about to go to play basketball. And it's like, man, you just did a bunch of random like med ball jumps and this and that. And it's like, you just gave them an additional 30 minutes of the same stressor that they're about to receive on the court. It's like none of that was really feeding into performance. That was just added stress that was similar to sport. It's an important piece that definitely people are talking about a lot more now. And because the NBA schedule, how to make sure that the basketball and the training and the medical all comes together in a good way. And it's an arduous task, but I think we're getting better and better.
I love it. So let's dive in there a little bit. Let's talk about consolidating stressors, because obviously this is a big talking point with Daniel Bove's book being published. I'm actually going through it now. He's coming on the show. I'd love to know how you guys are either kind of using that system, that framework, or maybe modifying it to meet your own demands.
I think, I definitely won't take away anything from Bove and, what you're about to talk about with him. That's my guy. His book I'll use it more as a shout out to him, man. He put together something really cool and resource, I think, that has been, sorely needed in the NBA space for sure. And just a really coming from a strength coach and a sports scientist, as I'm sure he would, call himself as well. It's practical stuff that is easy enough to understand and easy enough to make actionable on day to day. So that stuff like that is, everybody go buy it, read it. It's great. It's such an easy read and it's so super, super actionable. So definitely kind of one of those standard readings that we all need to go through. But in saying that, I mean, we totally vibe on a similar mission of, there's days that we need to be very careful about how we dose stressors. I remember probably whether on the first podcast or the second one we did, I forget, of talking about like, we are the only, or it might have been the presentation, we are the only person on the staff that is adding this stress to this person,
Right.
like the athletic trainer, the physical therapist, for the most part, and we have very active practicing physical therapists, so they are adding some stress as well.
Right.
But is this relieving of stress because of the arduous nature of the season? So like, we have to be so careful because we got guys that are coming in that are under constant levels, some level of fatigue. So we should be intelligent to not just stress them more just because it's an off day and we have more time with them to get a lift in when they played 30 minutes in the game the night before. Now, as we know, that's probably not a way to consolidate stressors to say that, we're going to have probably a moderate lift, based on the NBA after 30-minute game, where that's a high day that you follow with moderate day. Okay, fine. But what's the next day? Probably a game.
Right.
So then when is the low day coming? And do you think that's enough? Where are they only having it once a week or twice a week? And these are things that we really have to look at. Again, Bo's book kind of starts to map things out in a really clear way, but it's super important. I mean, I think right now for us, as we evolve and get better with that, for instance, here's where, you look back and you're like, I'm a dummy. And, you say things that you don't realize a few years later you're going to like. But I remember not kind of discouraging post-game lifts because I think what I saw was initially just like a waste of time. And I was like looking at these lists, I'm like, why are we even doing this? Post-game, it's like, this is kind of what we're getting out of it. But as we've evolved and now guys kind of understand expectations, what a great time to get guys to have their high lifting day on the same day, sometimes when needed, on the same day as their game when appropriate. And, what a great time to do that, because we can, if we're very targeted with our training, this has been said many times, again, people are doing this, but if my focus is an integrative, some sort of exercise at high intensity, made as some people we call right now like a biomotor day, that would reflect this neurological challenge, most of the time, some sort of integrative task at a higher intensity, whether we're searching for strength or rate of force development or something like that, power development, put that post game, and all they have to do is that. If they have to, doing some sort of deadlift for 5 or 6 sets, that only takes, 15 minutes, and they've done something that we believe has stressed them in a way that's worthwhile on the same day as the other high stressors of the game. So they jumped, hopped, and bound, they changed direction, they did their speed work, they were challenged in this big way. And then we just added in this higher resistance at the end, just because we believe that we need to maintain that sort of level of strength that's going to buffer some of the stressors and is going to keep them jumping high and being strong and all those things, So I think that's an example of matching those things up, where in other years, maybe we would have said like, hey, fine that you don't want to lift post game. We got an off day coming up. We can get it in then if you're feeling good. It kind of like you push it down the road, where I think now we're better at scheduling certain systems and pieces of information that are coming out, make it easier for us to schedule and understand how we should do that. Let's be better at matching these things up. Get with our basketball coaches, get with our athletic trainers, understand the global stress, this overall stress of what's going to be incurred from all of those pieces of the department. And all those things should probably look pretty similar. There shouldn't be this outlier of like, this coach just wants to hammer them. And we're like, oh, well, he's going to get a massage and just do some isolation work today. So he's doing his own 2 bike ride, or he's doing yoga. And then all of a sudden he does something crazy on the court. It's like, oh, well, that's probably what we need to rein in here. So if that makes sense, I think that's some of the direction.
It totally does. And it reminds me, so like when I worked in soccer, obviously it's a little bit easier because there's a weekly rhythm, right? It's like Saturday game, Sunday off, or whatever. Like there's a weekly rhythm versus your guys' schedule is way more chaotic. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed about the book and we just described is this idea, essentially keeping the entire team in the same rhythm, right? So like in soccer, if a guy plays 90 minutes, he doesn't need any conditioning, right? But the guy that subbed on for the last 10, he may need some supplemental conditioning work after the game so that they can all take the next day off or do a recovery day and then Monday's off. However you lay it out, the goal is to keep the entire team in a similar rhythm. So, your guy that played 40 minutes is probably going to do as little as possible. Guy that plays 20 to 39 maybe is going to do a little bit more. Your guys that didn't get on or maybe played 15, 20, they're going to do a little bit more than that, right? But the goal is now, hey, on game day, everybody did something high intensity so that the next day everybody's kind of in the same rhythm. And it's not perfect, but it starts to help you keep everybody in the same wavelength or the same groove throughout the season.
Yeah, no, I like the way you put it, where keeping everybody in the same rhythm, because I think that is the, to simplify it in an easy way to understand. And why is that important? Because I think the guys who, don't play a lot of minutes, what would they be expected to do if somebody, God forbid, gets injured or there's a different substitution pattern or something like that? They need to be prepared for the same stress as that person on game day. So are they ready for 10 to 15 minutes of play at all times? Because realistically, that's probably what they're going to be subjected to if it's random on a night. So all these guys really do have to be in a similar rhythm. And yes, it's going to be to certain extents, because certain guys can be bucketed into how many average minutes they would be expected to play. So it doesn't mean that some guy on the bench, we have to go through 40 or 30 minutes of gameplay,
right?
Because when would we do that on game day anyway? But it's something where, okay, like we talked about before with monitoring, if we know that you're subjected to a certain level or a certain amount of high XLs, high decels, certain changes of direction, amount of jumps, et cetera, in 10 to 15 minutes of play, well, did you do something during that day that sort of mimics or comes close to mimicking that sort of profile of what your body should be stressed with? That's reflective of you being prepared for the amount of minutes of gameplay that you should be prepared for. So it doesn't have to be playing, because there's a lot of times where we find that very hard. On a game day, where are you going to do, it's not like we're going to wherever Hoodie Mello goes in New York and gets in 5 games real quick and then we're ready to roll. It's like,
right.
No, are you in the half court? Are you in the full court? Do we have 5s? Are we playing 3s? Like, that stuff sometimes is hard to coordinate, especially on the road as well. So there are times when, I have to be, or a strength coach has to be the stressor, the basketball sort of stressor guy.
Yes.
And then what are the things, because going to the previous question about quantifying these things and learning about the game, it's like the more we now know, it's like, all right, well, now we go to our mimic the basketball programming. How many hops and jumps and sprints can we get in right now that, again, will kind of set you up? So the objectification, again, of more of this stuff lends us to give that person, I think, a more purposeful training session.
That's awesome. And I don't want to totally belabor this point, because we've talked a lot about the physiology, but I've seen this in the team side as well, the psychology behind this too, right? So case in point would be if there's a game, right? And then you win or lose, whatever. Sometimes the guys that didn't play, there's a psychology of, oh, we won, I feel good, I'll go get a lift. Or we lost, I need to blow off steam, right? Yes. Versus I've seen this a negative context where it's like, okay, you play Saturday, the reserves don't play Saturday, so Sunday they go and they've got their own training, right? And well, now a coach is like, well, we got to get their fitness up, right? So psychologically they feel like they're being punished. They didn't play. They're on an off day getting just their balls kicked in, for lack of a better term, right? They're getting beat up. And now the whole team's out of rhythm too, right? Because the guys that played are on a 2 or 3 day window. The reserves that got killed on Sunday. It's there's the psychology aspect of this too. So I think you hit the nail on the head. If we can keep the team kind of in this same rhythm, it's good for unity. It's good physiologically, psychologically. There's just a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay, so one more big topic that I want to open up here. But based on your IG feed, it looks like you are just killing the flywheel arm training lately. So I'm waiting for the Chris Chase ebook of flywheel arm training to come out. But in all seriousness, I know you're a big fan and you've been exploring with that. So what are some of the pros and cons you feel like to using flywheel in your training programs?
Yeah, thanks for the IG shout out for sure. That's the main reason why I'm coming on here. Get my followers up.
That's right.
Sure. But Yeah, it's funny, a million people use flywheel pieces of equipment or iso inertial training and are fond of it and understand the benefits. I'm just one dude that's kind of diving in as well alongside, kind of members of our staff and trying to, I'll say this, we started looking into this space because of going back to objectifying things, like looking at our suite of jumps, hops, bound testing, things that we test on the force plate, and trying to look at other things in the weight room and seeing if we were catering to some of these weaknesses that we're seeing with anything in the weight room, or doing, what is replicating these forces and at probably a higher level, and nothing, we're not seeing much that we're able to mimic this sort of stuff. So and that's particular to some of the eccentric, some of the loading metrics, performance metrics that got, eccentric impulse, just eccentric peak forces in general, guys that are, have an inability to really unload and drop down into that triple flex position, or at least showing hip, knee, and ankle flexion in a really dynamic, fast way. We see that that's at a decrement for a lot of guys. And then where are we really catering to that in a trainable way at high enough forces, with the things we do in the weight room? And, you quickly, check out flywheel training and understand that there's some forces there and there's a rhythm to that I think mimics, some of or overloads in a similar way, some of the things that we want to see out of our more dynamic or emergent tasks. And so getting a piece in and feeling it more, which I know way behind the ball, and people are probably nodding their head like, duh, we've been using this for years. Right. But, to plug it into some of the things we like to do is, and kind of getting our force plate on there and understanding, what these forces really are is interesting, man. I mean, looking at some of the impulse numbers and rate of force development, and you see what you could really overload by doing things in a particular way on something that actively pulls you down, down into that eccentric portion of the movement. Whereas obviously, what you give to the flywheel concentrically, that wheel spins and it's just going to keep spinning, and it's going to pull you down with whatever sort of force speed, whatever that you're getting from that concentric phase. So what's been interesting with, and, I'll shout them out and hopefully they can hook us up, but the Exerfly piece of equipment that we have, it just happens to be a brand that has an interesting additive to their platform, which is motor. So that was the most intriguing piece. We looked at the flywheel space and we were like, oh, people are talking about this eccentric overload. It's like, all right, well, what does that really mean? Like when we get on the force plate, like, what metrics do we see really being overloaded, if we're doing, say, a bilateral squat or something like that. Now, the interesting piece, and as many people know, it's like, whatever you give concentrically through this, and if you hit parallel and you push concentrically out of the bottom, you have a long way to produce some force. So you're building up some force that then you could go the same distance down. It's hard to make that an eccentric overload greater than the concentric force, but some people will, lift people up out of the bottom to create more of a concentric push. Some people will like do these 1 1/4 squats to then limit the range. So you have to stop quicker on the eccentric phase, which then sort of overloads that because you're not going through as much of a range of motion to sort of buffer the force or attenuate the force. You're having to stop it quicker. But what this company has done is added a motor to then say, whatever you push out of the bottom concentrically, this motor is going to kick in on the way down and give you a percentage more of that force, or that speed of the wheel is going to go at a greater speed, 10% more of whatever you pushed concentrically. So can you then get a greater eccentric overload, or an actual, like, whatever we're meaning by overload, which may be an impulse overload or a rate of force development overload, you have a greater chance of that actually happening because of this added pull. So it's not just, I only have a certain amount to give concentrically, and because it's a yo-yo, and again, it's just spinning based off of that speed on the way up, I need some more pull to really get the overload that I may want. And the motor then maybe provides that. So then it's attractive in the sense that, we could, for instance, do jump landing from a high box, and we could drop down and be subjected to this increased amount of force because of the altitude that we dropped from. And if you landed and stopped that force in an athletic position, then you've been overloaded eccentrically with a force that we would say, oh, this is probably training you or stressing you in some way. But I think other than that, like if we stacked a bunch of boxes off and we're doing these high altitude drops, I think this flywheel space allows for more of what we're looking for the levels of, kind of force or intensity that we would need to make a difference, and I think right now it's then playing with what you can make trainable, and there's a learning curve, as everybody knows, and a rhythm to it and probably support that would be needed in some things that allows for you to do it at the level that you need to do it. Because squatting on that thing, I mean, people know, man, you got to get some repetitions in before you're really good at it, or before you're probably doing it in a way that is intended, just like anything else. So, but I think because of the population we work with, an adult population that needs to play NBA and needs to be subjected to these forces, that was a tool that we got sort of directed to based off of what's out there to say, this could be a valuable piece for sure. So I love training on it. I mean, I'm sure everybody says this, man, but like, it's just fun, it's just like, yeah, I mean, I think they're getting better with quantifying stuff where it's like, I try to force plate on top of the platform as much as I can to get some objective feedback there. Their app, I think everybody's apps are getting better to say like, yeah, we don't have a weight number that we're chasing, but I think there's, a way to start making that have standards or objectives to it. So yeah, interesting piece. Have you been use flywheel training or anything?
Okay. So, I don't. It's something that I've been intrigued by. Watching you do it, I was like, I mean, I've thought numerous times about the role and the benefit of it, but I didn't know where to fit it in. And quite frankly, like in our space, we don't have a ton of extra equipment. So if Exerfly ever wants to become a sponsor for iFast, I would make sure I give them a good shout out, find a little spot for it in the gym. But no, I haven't. But here's what I like about it. Here's the note. Like I always write down like a thought when you're talking. And the thing that I wrote down was, when I think about this, I think about my old training in powerlifting and accommodating resistance, right? Like this is accommodating resistance in the sense that it slingshots you down and then you have to work extra hard concentrically to push back up. But the thing that I never jived with about accommodating resistance with athletes is, look, we can barely teach most of our guys to squat and hinge the way that we want them to, right? They're not power lifters. So the thing that I like about this is much lower barrier to entry, right? Like I was just watching all your videos and I'm like, these are all exercises and variations they could do from day one because they've already trained them. Versus like, how long does it take somebody to barbell back squat the way that you want? Maybe never. Maybe never with a guy that's 6'5", 6'8", 7 foot. So that's what I liked about this. So, I mean, again, I'm making notes. Bill's going to kill me because I'm making notes of all like the pieces of equipment I've thought about purchasing. And so now, but you're right too. That's the other thing. It looks fun. And like, don't discount that. Like these guys aren't professional weightlifters. So they want something that's going to be fun and give them a training benefit, right?
Yeah. I think, and to cater to, like you said, don't tell Bill this, because then you're, I got me thinking about like some of the things in that space of, I was just talking to Ty Terrell in the bubble, and I was in the weight room with our like portable version of that flywheel. And so we would just be bantering back and forth and just on, just stuff in general. And the kind of the subject matter of guys who are not very good at, descending into an athletic position and have these limited areas of mobility and cannot eccentrically orient their pelvis in a way that allows them to descend and give them any chance at a trainable strategy with something like a jump or a squat or something like that. And like, what are some of these things we could do that cater to these faster, more emergent tasks like jumping, or just, something that's faster in something that looks like a squat or a single leg squat or whatever, where you have to keep some sort of relatively upright torso, flex that ankle, knee, hip, and not have to dump your pelvis forward and not have to, flare your rib cage, all these things that we know we're like, this is less than stellar. But it's hard to do that, like you said, if you are using accommodating resistance as the way to go about doing that. So what I like, again, about the just pumping flywheel here is just this is only what I'm feeling as a coach. I don't know, hopefully more and more information, or I could just be dumb and not understanding this. But like the rhythm that you could get into allows for more of this unloading at the top. If the strap is a certain length, and that's learning too, it's like too short strap, man, I don't like that feeling. It just pulls me down and I can't control it. I'm only sort of maybe stopping it, or I don't have a rhythm with it. But if you allow for some leeway, then you can get into this rhythm that feels like you're able to unload and then descend into something that feels more like what you would feel in a jump. And now with accommodating resistance, you would have the barbell on your back and the bands bearing down at you on the top. So you want to escape from that. But there is that ability to sort of unload and rhythmically descend back down in something like a supported squat, where you're kind of catching yourself in, like you start to unload and then forces build, as we know in a counter movement jump. I think you do that more on the flywheel and the curve looks more like you would see maybe on a jump.
Yeah.
In terms of like where that force production would start as you descend, and you have that ability to again unload. So that necessitates the strap at the length, playing with that length and getting, there's a few sets and people can attest to this. Like I got to take 3-4 sets to like set up my right strap length angle, and we'll get better at that, of course, but like that feeling is there, that I think, you bring up a good point with accommodating resistance, that I think feels better, and like you said, allows for more trainability and an entry point that's much easier than some of those other options.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just envisioning, instead of the old school like barbell back squat with bands or whatever that you would do, okay, now let's go with like a heels elevated, hand supported squat,
100%.
right? You put somebody
100%.
at a 15, 20 degree slant. Now you've got that upright posture. You can still get the speed and the pace and the RFD that you're looking for. Like, I don't know. I just really like that.
Yeah.
So, hey, Exerfly, hit me. Hit me.
Yeah, give it a shot.
I love it, man. Well, we're up against the clock here because unfortunately, when my son gets home from school, he brings friends and the dog gets out. And so all kinds of crazy stuff happens. But we've got our lightning round. So I want to make sure we get this in, all right? Okay, so I got 5 questions. Number 1, I feel like you're like a Vegas Summer League vet at this point. Do you have a favorite spot to hit when you're in Vegas? Like food? Do you have a favorite spot you have to go to?
PG spots, the ones that are the daytime spots.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I think so. Vegas veteran sounds terrible because that place is interesting. It's spending like the 12, 13 days there for Summer League is always interesting, but there's a place because food is hard to come by. Good food's hard to come by in Vegas, like healthy options. So there's this place in the Palazzo, I think it's called the Grand Lux Cafe. It's attached to the Palazzo somehow via casino. If people know Vegas, it's some random connection. But they allow you to just order like eggs, veggies, some sort of meat, and just pull that together. So I'll walk over there most days. I didn't do it as much this summer league, but previous summer leagues, because that's the checkbox in the morning, man. It's like, other than that, it's resort stuff. It's like donuts and like go to the walk through the casino and get like a, fried this or that. So Grand Lux, shout out Grand Lux Cafe, man. Shout out Exerfly and Grand Lux Cafe.
Dude, here. I'm going to have all the sponsors after this episode. They're just going to be cutting checks.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay.
That's the low key spot.
I love it. Okay. So other than your direct arm work right now, what's your favorite flywheel exercise?
I really worship the entire collection. If anybody can get that reference from, I think, Office Space, right? Is that Michael Bolton he asked him about? I don't know, man. I love what I've said after I've done it to like our other coaches where I'm like, man, I really love this is enough shoulders elevated hip bridge. That was awesome. Just like, I don't know why, just that like that rhythm to it. Like it feels way more trainable. I feel way more from glute hamstring. So that's really good. And that's something I don't use a lot, not because, I don't like it or anything, but we just don't have like a good setup for that. So I thought that was great. I mean, rear foot elevated split squats are
those look nice.
Oh my God. The hinging is, feeling the hinging. It's like, to me, not being someone, I don't use, too much kettlebell work or swings. Again, not going to like it, but it kind of feels like a great, that similar feedback. Because again, you can get into that unloading space if you set up the strap in a right way. and get a similar feeling of that. So I like that. And I feel like I could way more violent with way more force on that.
I like that. I like that. Another, I think you did this as well. Did you do like a lateral lunge or like a lateral split squat too?
Fun. Oh my God. Yeah.
That looked like it would be like 3D, just glute torture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're lucky, like I'll play around with stuff, but lucky to have, all these options where it's like, like you wear a certain vest from a certain company and it may not feel that great when you do a squat or this. So, that lateral squat is with the belt on is really, that feels really good. Throw the heel ramp up there. They have something that attaches to their piece as well. Like I think K-Box does and all these other companies, but you get a little slant or a little stability there. It's money. Yeah. Again, you got to get through that learning curve, I think. And then you're like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is good.
I like it. Okay. Number 3, what's your most fond memory of the past NBA season?
Oh, wow. I think that the fact that we made the playoffs, and the fact that we got in on the road at Golden State in a game where, Ja really stepped up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a great game.
In a more general sense, that game just in general was awesome to watch and was awesome to kind of be a part of just, we have, not to go too far into commentary, but, we have a team that's young and that's, people are like, oh, this is cool. What are they doing? Like what are the Grizzlies going to advance to or whatever? And that's cool to see young team kind of step up in a hard environment and win a game. And that was like, oh, cool. We're still kind of moving in this good direction. Like this was such a great reward for them. And, you get in those locker room environments that are like super happy and cool and everybody's just like bouncing around, like, you can't beat that stuff. So that's what keeps us coming back, right?
Well, and tactically it was a fun game to watch because your guys' game plan, like, hey, we're just going to blitz Steph and make everybody else beat us, and frankly they didn't have the guns that night, like obviously they don't know Clay and that sort of thing, but man, you guys had a great game plan going into that game.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, where it's like to complement that, then the other side, our players have to step up. And even more so, it's like, that's cool that like that experience is just invaluable when that happens. And you take that as this little fingerprint on your brain that you can come back to and be like, yeah, I've been here before. So it makes for an interesting next year when we get into those experiences again.
I love it. Okay. Number 4, what do you enjoy most during the NBA offseason?
Vacation.
Is there like a specific spot or activity or just like nothing, like chill?
Man, more to cater to this, man. I definitely enjoy the time away for sure. We all need that. Like strength coaches are so notorious for just being strength coaches and be like, I'm just going to visit weight rooms and all that stuff.
Right.
And definitely I love that stuff too. And go, like, if I'm in LA, going to work out at Tim Karen's place, if in other places that, back in New England, it's like I catch up with folks and it usually is like, let's go work out and then do this or that. So I love doing that, having more time for that stuff. Obviously the Con Ed stuff like this, you have more time for. But man, I just bought a house recently, man. So I'm trying to get that lawn right. That's my main.
Yes.
So that, we all need those things that are, outside of this, that I need to turn my brain off more and more from strength and conditioning type stuff. Cause I feel, you realize how much you're rewarded if you do that, and it makes the job that much better.
Absolutely. All right. Last but not least, what's next for Chris Chase?
Keep rolling, keep rolling. Shout out to our staff, and there's no sponsorship coming from that, but humbled every day that I'm sure saying this for years, man. I'm super, super, super lucky with just the people I've been able to work with. And I get to banter about ideas that I have with, up against minds that are really giving me some honest, great answers. And, with shout out to our guy EO, man. We're rolling with a great group, and can't wait to see what the next few years are all about, because like I said, we just kind of get it a little bit more each year, which makes it easier. And then you start to kind of see the light, what's important, what is everybody's, strengths, weaknesses. We have that understanding more and more every year. And man, what these minds can do with some of our young people on the staff who haven't had much experience that are going to have 4 or 5 years experience coming up. And it's like, I think, man, that's a lot of power, brain power going into some of this training stuff, and a lot of great personalities that our team really messes with, more importantly.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, that's what's next, man. Just trying to make it here in Memphis, and trying to create some sort of oasis in my mind and pretend that it's not, maybe not Memphis, Tennessee for a little while. No slight on Memphis, but it's there's some improving to do.
Yeah, no, I love it, man.
It ain't Miami, I guess.
That's true. It's not. That's what I tell myself every offseason. I'm like, man, if I can get people to Indiana to hang out for a whole offseason, I'm doing something right.
No doubt. That's probably the point, right? Memphis, you are great, but it's hard to convince our guys to stick around sometimes.
For sure. Well, Chris, man, as always, great catching up. Where can my listeners find out more about you or connect with you, whatever?
Once in a while, I think I get this, hankering to put something on IG, and maybe it's more and more these days. I don't really know, but yeah, it's probably there. I do love interacting on there, man. I mean, I have great conversations. Like, our conversations have stemmed from that. So yeah, hit me up on that IG, man. I'm an OG, I feel like, of the IG, but so once in a while, I love sparking some conversation on there. So feel free to hit me up, everybody.
I love it, man. Well, Chris, dude, thank you so much for your time, man. This was really great.
For sure. Anytime, man. Looking forward to the next one.
Yes. All right, my friend, that does it for this week's show with Chris. Really hope you enjoyed it. I find myself every time we talk just thinking about training a little bit differently. And we've been blessed to talk, whether it's on the phone, whether it's on the show, whether it's maybe live and in person at an event. He's just one of those guys that's constantly evolving in a positive way, and not evolving just for the sake of evolution, but evolving to make himself better and to make his athletes better. I just can't say enough good things about Chris. Enjoy our time together, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode as well. So if you did, I've got a small favor to ask. Normally, I would ask you to subscribe. If you're not already, subscribe. But if you enjoyed this show, please share it with somebody else that you feel like would benefit from it. It could be a fellow athlete, it could be a trainer or a coach, anybody that you feel like wants to improve the health and the longevity of either themselves or the athletes they work with, I think could benefit from this episode. So please do that. I would greatly appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for your support. Love and appreciate you. And we'll be back next week with our next episode. Take care.